you ever come across a painting that is okay, but you just don't like it, and you're wondering, can I reuse this paper? Why not? Let's see how far we can go with this. It has some colors in here that I think are a little bit staining, but I'm going to show you a process that might work. Again, a lot of these colors do stain the paper and they get into it and you can't get them out totally, but possibly enough that you could do a painting over it and work around that. This paper is Arches 100% cotton rough, 140 pound. First thing I'm going to do is tape it down on all sides. Right now I'm putting it directly on the table because I'm not going to paint in watercolor again today. I want to make sure it's down pretty solidly, and then I am going to work this. I'm going to wet it thoroughly. You can spray, you can wash it with water. I don't have any water in my spray bottle right now, so I'm going here. Just really soak it. You can see already I'm picking up paint. See that on my brush? Okay, clean that off. Take a bristle brush and kind of scrub around. Now, because this is 100% rag and not a wood fiber paper, it will take more abuse than a cheaper paper. I still don't want to be too rough with it. It's better to do it gently and keep kind of moving around on it to see how far you can get. Especially in some of those darker areas. Just keep giving it a little scrub. What you will end up with is a ghost of an image, but sometimes you can do a nocturne over that ghosted image or something else. Sometimes just practice strokes. You know, when you're working on trying to learn some brush strokes like the calligraphy or Japanese, Chinese, those Asian brush strokes. It's good to have an older piece of paper or scrap piece of paper that you can work on. All right, that's looking fairly worked in. I've kind of scrubbed it up a bit. Let's see how far it is. And you can do this more than once. If this first time as it dries it doesn't clean up enough, I can come back and do it again. Just taking a damp sponge, lifting some of that paint that I just loosened up from the paper. Use a gentle hand so that you're not going to damage too much of the paper. But it's cloth. I mean, you know, we do laundry, we wash cloth. This is a cloth paper. It will take some work. You can work on it is what I mean. It's not going to just fall apart like paper fiber would when you scrub it. All right, you can still see a little ghost of an image. We can see very much that the yellow here really stained the blues kind of down into the paper, but we've lost a lot of the edges on some of these sharper edges. You can scrub that a little bit more perhaps. Try lifting it a little more and then let it dry thoroughly. So when this is dry, I'll take a picture and add to the end of this short little video so you can see. All right, quick and easy. Try it yourself. Meanwhile, stay creative. Now my paper's dry, and as we can see, it's fairly light. So I'm going to try a painting on this to see how well it comes out by reusing it. There's still quite a bit of residual yellow, a little bit of red and blue, but as I am going through my sketchbook here, looking through, finding something that might suit this piece of paper, that might suit, you know, go through your sketches. That's a possibility. Maybe this one, if I turned it upside down. Anyway, looking through here. Oh, I like this one. So I think I'm going to use this, and to fit the paper, I could use this little hump here as this distant mountain, but as you see, it would be upside down. So I'm going to turn the paper around and play with this. So go ahead, follow along. I will do this in a little quicker time, and you can see I'm going to sketch it on first. Probably, sorry, that's upside down. I am going to do a pencil sketch as soon as I find my pencil. If I can't find my pencil, I'll just go ahead and use my pen and lay out the general area. That's basically because I want to not lose some of the details of a couple buildings in the distance and the composition. I want to make that strong. Let's try it. I wanted to point out that because I had this totally taped down as it was drying, remember how wet it was when I scrubbed it out? It is now a very flat piece of paper. Very nice. If I want to dampen this on both sides to use it, the way I'm going to do that is I can take water, spray on the back side, find my sponge, which is right now wrapped up in a paper towel, spread that evenly on the back side. You can see I use this as a scrap paper as well. So that will help to equalize the surface tension of the paper on both sides. I'm going to tape it down firmly again on the edges. As you notice, I've turned it upside down from the way it was before. Maybe run your fingernail right along the edge of the tape. And as we know, it's damp on the back side. And now I can redampen the front side if I want. I don't want it wet, I don't want it soaked, I want it lightly damp. Just a damp sponge helps to equalize, again, the surface tension on both sides of the paper. All right, I wanted to show you that. When I'm done with this, I'm going to leave it taped down because, again, I want it to dry totally flat. And it's going to take some time because this is a hard surface underneath. And the water that is on the back side is going to have to evaporate up through the porous paper over time. Should take about a day or so, depending on the humidity in the air. Now we're ready to paint. The paper is taped back down around all four sides. I have chosen a sketch out of my plein air sketchbook that I think will suit the layout of the ghost painting here. I kind of saw some mountains and landscape in the ghost painting, so I thought I'd look through the sketchbook to find something that would complement those indications, those areas and lines. I am using my ink pen here, partially because I couldn't find my pencil immediately, but because the layout here is quite simple, I am just sketching in a couple buildings, maybe the indication of where a tree might go. Then I think about my overall composition and design. I am going to encourage that Z shape that flows through the painting. Here I'm kind of drawing in the air, thinking it through before I put down the lines and the marks. How wide do I want this road to come out? I want to make sure that there's no line leading directly off that lower right corner of the paper, because that would just take the viewer's eye directly out of the painting without a way to come back. So that's all consideration. I'm just emphasizing one of the buildings. I had made it a little too small for the perspective in relationship to the other building, so I had to enlarge it. I'm now just wetting areas of the painting and planning out some color to throw in there. Start to define a bluish gray mountain in the distance. Adding a touch of that sap green just to warm it up so it sets it forward of the other mountains in the distance. Those are really, really foggy back there. A little ultramarine blue into my neutral tint on the palette. Adding a little more depth. Allowing the wet in wet to find its own beautiful spot. Emphasizing a tree line between the two buildings to tie them together as elements of the composition. And then continuing through on the other side of the tree. Little burnt umber to warm up and deepen that area in the foreground. Nice loose brush strokes. And not fussing with them. Get them down and try to leave them where they are. Allow those wet in wet washes to blend together. Kind of lost a little bit of direction of the road there, but you'll see later that I'll scrape it out and bring it back. My spotlight is reflecting on the water, so it's a little tricky to see the nuances of the colors in that area. Because this is built on an older painting and that stained paper, there are going to be more layers of colors here. There's so many ways to approach a painting. You can do it alla prima, which means those strong, clear colors and marks basically 1 or 2 times over a painting, or you can build layer upon layer in your painting, and that's kind of what I'm going to have to do here, considering that I started with an older painting that had been washed out. I always try to keep in mind that I'm just playing. I'm playing with the color and the paint and the brush strokes, because it may or may not come out. Nice thing is, it's not totally my fault if it doesn't, because the paint is doing a lot of what it wants to do, where it wants to flow, and how it wants to blend. And I am just guiding it along, or kind of reacting to it, like, oh, you want to do this? Okay, then I'm going to try doing this. Let's see how we play back and forth. It's kind of like theater when they just do those very loose plays. This is not the word I want What is that expression I want? Oh yeah, improv. That's what it feels like sometimes to me, that I am having an improv session with the paint. It is. It's kind of improvisational. Here I'm trying to bring back the road a bit by scraping the semi-dry paint. It's not dry enough. See how it's still shining? I need to look at that in the light. Oh, there, I blotted it very lightly to dry it a bit. So in order to do this scraping, and then I found out the end of my brush is kind of softened because it's old, you need a nice firm beveled tip to your brush to get this done, or some other tool. Anyway, to get this scraping to push the paint away, your paint really needs to be at the matte stage. So we're taking into consideration if it's very, very wet and there's water and paint sitting on the surface like a puddle, that is your gloss stage. And you can see that when you tip your head at an angle to the paper and look into the light. The next drier stage is your sheen. And a lot of this paper right now, you can see the sheen, like in the mountain and the tree area. The sheen is when there's still a good amount of surface water or liquid sitting on the paper, but you can see the texture of the paper through. The next drier stage is the matte stage. That's when it really has lost a lot of that glistening sheen, but the paper is still, not the paper, but the paint is still wet enough for you to manipulate it some. So most of your manipulative techniques will happen between the sheen and the matte stages. Scraping to reveal lighter paper underneath, your salt technique, oftentimes the plastic wrap technique, any other scrapings, things like that happen between those two stages. And it takes practice and experimentation to learn for yourself where those moments are. I can see in my painting that I scraped it a little too early, so it didn't get quite as light as I wanted it to be. That's okay. I'll just imagine that the road is fading into the distance and does not have a lot of high contrast. And because of the underpainting and the reused paper here, I think this will eventually become a very muted, quiet country scene. I'm going to speed up the process a little bit here for you. Thinking through how there was almost too much blue in the foreground, so I'm glazing it with some soft green. I am again aiming toward that hazy gray day in the country. Glazing is just taking a very thin application of paint and water and lightly brushing it over the paint and the paper that's underneath. I've decided that the sky probably needs some definition, so I'm taking some cerulean blue and just running it along the edge of the distant mountains, trying to define those a little bit more, make it interesting. And as I look at this later, it could either be mountains or clouds. Doesn't much matter really. Here I'm scraping out some trunks of the trees with the end of my brush handle. You can kind of push it, or you can pull that paint. Back to taking an overall view, a good look at this painting. What does it need? I'm adding in some warmth for that foreground. A little burnt sienna, yellow ochre, a hint of sap green. That warms up that foreground. Again, just a glaze over, following the flow of the land. You know, that soft curve. And here's a little extra definition along the edge of that road. Because I'm doing glazes and doing it very slowly and lightly, I can build up the value or the color or the contrast bit by bit. I am going to have to take care of that lower right-hand corner. I have a line almost exactly off the corner. You saw that I softened it a bit already, but it needs to be more indistinct. A little more depth of green into that grass to tie the greens of the land masses together. So I have that warm yellow-green in the foreground, kind of a rusty green in the midground, and then very bluish in the background. That helps with my aerial perspective, as well as the linear perspective of the road and the buildings, the size of the road, how it moves back in space. Thinking about varying the value of that foreground. So I just blotted once or twice in a certain spot to feel that the light is kind of coming across that landscape. I mean, it's a weak light, it's a foggy light, but it's going to make a little bit of differentiation there, so it's not all just flat. Here I am adding, kind of a roof color. Later on, I'm going to have to adjust this some more. It's too much like the other colors around it. If I want that to be a detail, I need to have it stand out a little bit more. Take your time in thinking on these things. This is kind of red. I don't know why I thought this would work. It didn't really work. So later on, I'll come back and lighten that to help draw the eye back to that house. Yep, here I am already, blotting it, trying to fix it. See, it's a little bit lighter there, so that's nice. Now's the time to start figuring out what I need for finishing details. What is going to pull the elements of this painting together? Take your time at this point. Keep stepping back. Think it through. Make considerations before making brushstrokes. It could be a good time to take a photo of this and put it into a digital editing program like Procreate and play around with the color. If I did that, I'd probably go like, oh, that house needs to be light. Why am I trying to darken it? It's easy to make good decisions after the effect, right? After you've painted. That's why it's important to step back during the painting and really think it through. I had to soften that white sparkle because it was drawing too much attention to that spot. It was too bright, too much contrast. See, I'm back to blotting that house again. The overall painting is quite dry at this point. It's in the matte stage or dry, and I am bringing in some fine finished details. Little suggestions for tree trunks and shading in the distance, trying to maintain those light areas that I had scraped out prior to this. I can't do too many sharp details at this point because the paper is still in the matte stage. So any sharp dry brush details will just blend in to the rest of the painting. So I am going to have to wait until it is totally dry, maybe a few hours later or the next day. So set this aside and let it dry totally before finishing totally. Totally. Here it is when it is dry, so I can touch up any details. As you see, I lightened the house, and I did that by actually using a little bit of acrylic titanium white. And then when I'm finished, I carefully remove the tape at an angle so it does not rip into the painting. And here is the finished painting on reclaimed watercolor paper. It can be done. Try it. Meanwhile, stay creative.